The first boot print wasn't mine. Too long, too clean. Stamped on the pale blue crust like a signature that wanted to be read. Frost hissed when I breathed. The world held its breath back. Dawn smudged the ridge in pink and ash, and the prince walked east as if pulled by a string you couldn't see. I followed. A crow broke the quiet, then silence stitched itself again. Would you keep going if the cold said your name? What would you do if the wind started answering? A thin fog slid between the firs, whispering in the needles. Every 10 steps the snow changed tone, hollow to solid, like the ground was thinking. The trail did not hesitate. I did. A low hum. Far off. Maybe a river. Maybe not. The last bend opened to the cliff. The prince marched to the edge, stopped dead, and did not turn back. No scuff, no slide, no blood, just sky and the far gray sea, wrinkled like old paper. Somewhere below, something thumped once. The echo took too long to return. We stood with the sea, taking long, tired breaths, and the wind pawing at our coats like a beggar. I said nothing, because words felt like footprints too. And I didn't want to leave the wrong kind. The edge showed nothing but air and the tide below, white scars on gray skin. Elias reached for my sleeve and stopped short, as if touching might break whatever was holding us here. Somewhere a buoy bell rang, one note, then none. Who walks to a cliff at dawn and vanishes clean? Who wants to be erased so perfectly? A gull screamed and the sound bent, thin as wire. I dropped a small stone. It fell forever. Or seemed to, then the sea chewed it without a splash I could hear. My stomach answered the silence with a cold twist. The prints behind us were ours now too, braided with the first set, and I hated that fact more than the cold. We circled, careful, like dancers who feared waking the floor. The snow told partial truths, a sharper toe here, a deeper heel there, and between them, a rhythm that felt wrong, like someone walking with a secret clenched in their teeth. I brushed aside powder near a scrub of dead heather and found a second thread. A dark blue fiber caught in ice. Elias knelt, and the ice squealed under his knee. He opened his mouth, closed it, and listened with me. The sea faded, and for a heartbeat I heard something else. Faint, metallic, regular, like a chain tapping rock in sleep. It stopped the instant I noticed. Coincidence is lazy, I thought. This wasn't. The sky brightened, showing the long black seam where cliff met ocean, and the seam looked stitched by an unsteady hand. We mapped the prints from the forest's mouth to the last clear step. No drag marks, no scuffs where someone turned. The pattern tightened near the edge, steps closer together as if a decision had narrowed to a point. I tried to imagine the moment. Did they look up, close their eyes, forgive someone? A gun would leave noise. A rope would leave geometry. A body would leave the sea asking questions it didn't want. None of that was here. Elias pointed at a small notch in the snow, a crescent like a bite. Metal? I thought. A hook? The wind rose, carrying the tannic smell of broken pine, and I tasted iron that wasn't in my mouth. I told him to back up. The crust had that drumhead sound now, tight and treacherous. Beneath us, the cliff kept its old secrets awake. I lay flat and slid forward until the world narrowed to the cliff's lip and a narrow theater of air. The sea boomed like a slow heart. Between the lichened rocks, 10 feet down, a ledge slick with rime held a scatter of clues, a chalky scrape, a pressed oval, the ghost of a heel. A vertical rope bruise in the frost traced a line downward and away, vanishing into mist. So no one fell. Someone left. The prints had ended, but the path had learned a new direction. I looked back at Elias and saw the choice grab his face. We could go home and tell the absence, or we could climb where the cold wanted us. A wave hurled itself at the base, and in the foam something dark turned once, then went still, watching in the only way stillness can watch. We tested the crust with our weight, read the cliff like a page you only get to turn once. The rope mark in the frost traced a decision that wasn't ours, yet it waited like an open door. I tapped a piton into a seam and the rock answered with a thin bell note that ran down the face and didn't stop for a long time. The smell of brine crawled up to meet us. A gull cut a white line through the mist and vanished as if edited out. We spoke only with glances and nods. Names felt too loud. Would you trust a path laid by a stranger who refused to leave a return? Gloves squeaked against metal. The first flakes began to sift, slow as ash. Far below, the tide drew back, thinking about how to climb. We tested the rope, then the rope tested us, and every fiber hummed like a throat clearing in a quiet room. I counted to 3. The edge slid past. The world narrowed to stone, breath, and the old, patient pull of gravity. The first 10 feet were all negotiation, boot edges feeling for sentences hidden in the rock. Ice shelled the holds. Breath fog turned to glitter and drifted away. The rope thrummed when the wind shouldered the cliff, a low string note that set my teeth on edge. He moved with the care of someone carrying water in both hands. Below us, a narrow shelf winked in and out of fog, a promise or a lie. A metal tick tapped the stone somewhere to the left. Irregular, then gone. Like a signal too shy to finish its word. What waits for those who keep answering echoes? My fingers found a cold ring set into the rock. Not new, not old, chalk ghosting the metal. The prints above had been clean. Here the wall were smears, palm wide, vertical, rising. A wave boomed and left the cliff trembling in its bones. We slid lower, and the shelf finally held still, wide enough to choose. The shelf took our weight and gave back a small sigh of snow. To the right, the rock pressed close. To the left, the sea rehearsed endings. At the far end, the shelf tapered to a dark seam, a mouth cut sideways. Salt dripped from its lip with the slow patience of caves. I knelt and found a boot oval printed in rhyme, slightly smaller than the ones above, angled inward. Someone had turned their body sideways to slip through. Between 2 scratches, a chalk mark shaped like an unfinished arrow faded under new frost. The wind couldn't reach us here. Our ears rang with leftover air. We leaned in, and the cave exhaled. It smelled of wet rope, old fish paraffin. A scrap of blue thread lay caught on a barnacled nub, twin to the one we'd found above. The light behind us dimmed as a cloud pulled its hood over the sun, and the opening seemed to think wider thoughts. Inside, the stone closed around us and the world traded horizons for echoes. Headlamps struck wet ceilings and tiny quartz stars answered back. The floor sloped, ribbed by old tides. Puddles wore skins of ice that cracked like whispered oaths with each step. Someone had been kind to the dark. A half-burned candle nub nested in a tin. A thermos dented and empty. A coil of frayed line looped twice and left as if it might remember the way out. The metallic ticking returned, closer now, counting 6 beats. Resting, counting 6 again. I mouthed the number and felt foolish and terrified at once. We passed a wall where the salt had written white veils, and a set of knuckle marks had rubbed them thin. The air warmed. Not much, but enough to feel like breath from a throat deeper in. If a place can watch, this one watched. The passage bent twice, then uncoiled into a chamber big enough to hold the body of a small storm. Our light skated over a chalk map scratched into basalt, a jagged line from cliff to an aches deeper inland, arrows that changed their minds halfway. Near the base lay a broken carabiner, teeth burred smooth, and a single black glove turned palm up as if it had tried to catch a falling word. The ticking became clear, not metal, but a drip striking a rusted bucket, steady as a slow clock. Footprints, 2 sets now, crossed the chamber, one crisp, the other smeared by a drag as though someone had carried weight that refused to be called weight. We listened until listening felt rude. Then wind moved somewhere behind us where wind shouldn't be, and the rope at my waist gave the faintest tug from the direction we came. We were not the last to enter. The rope at my waist twitched again, small, almost polite. then settled like it hadn't moved at all. The chamber held its cold breath, and the slow drip kept time like a teacher with a ruler. We turned our lights toward the tunnel we'd come through and saw only hanging frost, bending like hair in water. Another tug, not from ahead but sideways through the stone in a way that felt wrong to name. Would you say hello to a pull you couldn't see? Would you pretend you hadn't felt it? The chalk map glowed pale, the cakes becoming less like a mark and more like an opening eye. A faint scuff whispered near the bucket, as if the dark changed its stance. We backed toward the seam leading deeper, boots squealing on wet basalt. The air grew warmer by a thin degree, carrying paraffin and salt meat. Something tiny rolled across the floor and tapped my heel, a pebble orning. Our lamps shook. The drip missed one beat, then resumed. The passage narrowed until the rock pressed our shoulders, and the world became a long throat swallowing light. Our beams found soot ghosts above, black fans where flames had licked and lost. A jar lay on its side. Paraffin skin clouded, wick clipped clean. The smell got stronger, mixed with fish oil and old canvas. We inched along a ribbed ledge above a dark trench and counted the splashes our feet did not make. From ahead came a brief exhale like a lantern being snuffed, followed by a scratch that traveled the wall and stalled between my palms. Who tends fire under a cliff at dawn? Who draws heat into stone and teaches it to keep secrets? We passed a set of shallow handprints pressed in salty mud, small and deliberate. Each fingertip, a coin of grit. The ceiling fell to a crawl. We slid packs and breathing slowed to coins as well, spent one by one. The squeeze opened into a tall slot, where the roof broke into a narrow skylight, a wound of pale dawn. Air poured through in slow pulses, timing itself with the distant boom of the tide. Each breath lifted a curtain of spray and let it fall like applause. On the rock beneath the light, a circle of ash curled around fish bones and a strip of burned blue fabric, the twin to our threads. A tin lay pierced and flattened, edges sharp, salt glittering like sugar. The floor here bore two stories, a neat set of inward steps and a stuttering drag that approached, paused, then turned toward a black corridor, veering inlet. The wind dropped a note through the skylight, a thin whistle that almost formed a word, and then changed its mind. I tasted iron and paraffin again, and thought of doors that open up instead of forward. We stood in the mixed light, and felt watched from above and below at once. The inland corridor pinched to a catwalk above a surge pool, black water folding and unfolding like a fist. The rock underfoot wore a thin glaze that remembered every fall. We timed the waves 4 slow inhales, one hard exhale that slapped the pool into white glass. On the 5th, we moved, hands palm flat, boots whispering chalk. Halfway across, a light flickered behind us. One blink, then darkness, and the cold on my neck stepped closer. Something small dropped into the pool and spun like a coin, ringing till the next swell took it. Would you look back when the stone tells you not to? The far ledge rose and we pulled up, chests burning, listening for pursuit and hearing only our blood rehearsing thunder. A rope scar crossed the stone here too, fresh and sinuous, disappearing into a fissure marked with a chalk triangle that pointed nowhere and everywhere at once. Beyond the fissure, the cave softened to earth, sand gritting under the ice crust, the ceiling lifting into roots that dangled like dark rain. Daylight filtered in from somewhere unseen, a thin milk glow. A cache lay tucked in a nook, a coil of clean rope, a tin of matches sealed with wax, a folded oilskin with a map drawn on its belly, lines, numbers, a circle inland matched to the X we had seen. Footprints here were crisp and recent, pointed inward, then circling as if someone had paced and thought, and paced again. The air carried a new smell, smoke from above, cedar and something sweet. A ladder of knotted line climbed into a shaft, wet rungs gleaming. The tug on my waist returned, gentle as a guiding hand. And the rope hummed a note that didn't belong to the sea. We lifted our eyes to the shaft. A breath drifted down that wasn't ours. The shaft breathed like a sleeping animal, warm on the exhale, cold on the inhale. Cedar smoke combing the air into thin ribbons that brushed our faces and were gone. The first knot creaked, then held. Water ticked off the rungs and fell into the dark we'd climbed from. Each drop a tiny countdown. We moved in a rhythm that had nothing to do with bravery. Hand, boot, test, lean, while the walls narrowed and widened like a throat-swallowing light. Somewhere above, a hinge murmured once, and stilled. Was the smoke an invitation or bait? A sliver of daylight cut across the shaft and struck the rope, turning wet hemp to a strand of wire. The ladder swayed, grit peppered down, tasting of rust and old bark. A carving appeared at shoulder height. 6 short lines, one long. Someone else's calendar burned into damp wood. The air grew sweeter. A draft stroked our backs, gentle as a warning, and the light sharpened into a square. Halfway to the square, the scent of paraffin returned, cut with something sweet. Apple peel, maybe. So out of place that it turned the climb into a question mark. A rung moaned and shifted a finger's width, and the shaft answered with a long, hollow note. We paused, counting heartbeats, and the note didn't stop. It was a low machine hum, patient and regular, hiding behind the earth like a metronome under a blanket. Who builds a pulse beneath a cliff and calls it safety? A draft rolled from above, warm enough to fog our lenses before it drifted away. Penciled arrows ghosted the timbers near our faces, smudged by damp palms, pointing up, then sideways, then up again, as if doubt had edited them. The light widened. A floorboard silhouette crossed the bright square and vanished. The ladder twitched without our help, a small tug that tightened every knot in our bodies. We climbed faster, swallowing the last rungs. We surfaced into a root cellar dressed like a memory shelves, bowed with jars of summer, caught in glass, a coil of blue rope drying on a peg, a lantern still warm enough to remember flame. The hum deepened, clearer here, resolving into a gentle generator purr behind a plank wall. On a crate sat 2 enamel cups, sweating heat, one with a ring of lip oil shining like a quiet confession. Snowlight filtered through floor cracks above, striped and soft. We listened for footsteps and heard only the cellar think, tiny clicks as jars cooled, boards answering their nails. The staircase rose, narrow and steep, and a door at the top wore a chain set to fall silently if lifted. Would you drink what waits for you? A draft slipped down the steps, carrying the daylight smell of clean coal and wood smoke. We touched the cups. Heat clung to the metal. Whoever warmed this room lived in the last 5 minutes. The chain lifted with a whisper, and the door opened on a cottage kitchen, trimmed in winter light. White paint, flaking like thin snow. A kettle ticking its way to silence. Boots by the back step melting neat ovals into the mat. Outside, the world had traded fog for a pale blue sky and a hush that made the gulls sound too far away. The hum retired into the floor. In its place came a soft, steady beep, 2 seconds apart, leaking through the open window from somewhere toward the tree line. A radio? A beacon? The yard showed 2 paths stamped into fresh powder. One straight to a lean-to by the bluff, one curving toward a stand of firs that held their shadows like secrets. We stood between arrows made of footprints and felt the day look over our shoulders. Which road do you take when both were drawn for you? The beep sharpened, closer now, though we hadn't moved. We followed the curved trail into the firs, where the snow thickened to a hush and the air smelled of resin and salt. The beep led us to a low boathouse tucked under the bluff, doors half sunk and banded with frost. Inside, the tide spoke in dark syllables against pilings, and the floor wore a map of wet footprints that stopped at a winch. A rope ran from drum to trapdoor and downward into black water, vibrating with a faint life, as if something below kept breathing through it. On the bench lay tools, a file still dusty with metal, a stack of chalk sticks, a pocket metronome ticking 6, then resting, 6, then resting, faithful to a private rule. The blue thread tied to a nail brushed the air like a pulse. Wind nudged the door. It drifted inward and clicked against the latch without closing. From the water, a soft exhale rose, answered by a second breath behind us. The winch handle was cold enough to bite, and the rope thrummed like a nerve every time the tide exhaled. We took turns cranking, each click a tooth in the boathouse's jaw. Water slapped the pilings in offbeat time. The metronome on the bench ticked its private 6 and rested, faithful as a heartbeat that refused to hurry. A smell of machine grease braided with cedar and salt. Would you raise what the sea has asked to keep? The line tightened, shivered, then rose with a reluctant weight. A cage broke the surface, steel, narrow, cribbed with barnacle scabs, and a door lashed by blue cord. Inside lay a lantern, a coil of clean rope, and a slate scratched with numbers that matched the chalk map. 6, 6, 6, pause, 3. The slate knocked the bars and rang like a bell under a pillow. We looked at each other and didn't speak, because names felt like promises. The rope kept humming, eager for an answer it believed we knew. We cut the cord and the cage door sighed. Old salt giving up a secret it had kept too long. The lantern inside took a spark on the second try and drew a circle into being. Pale gold on black water, fish scales winking like distant eyes. The trap led deeper than the tide should allow. A current tugged inward, not out, and the water breathed warm against our knuckles. Who warms a throat in the sea? A rail ran down beneath the surface, 2 parallel bars fuzzed with weed, ending in a shadowed mouth that swallowed our light. We looped fresh line to the cage, threaded the rail, and let the whole frame slide. It drifted forward, then pulled, as if something down there had taken its end and stepped backward into a room. The metronome ticked 6 and rested. Far below, an answering knock counted the same. We tied on, put our weight behind the line, and the floor moved under our boots. The tunnel received us with a hush that felt staged. We rode the cage a yard above the water, boots skimming the skin, lanterns strobing pillars of stone, as if the cave were a spine. The air warmed the deeper we slid. Condensation gathered on the cage bars and pattered back like rain that had changed its mind. The rails curved and rose. And then the tunnel opened into a dome, where the water lay still beneath an air bell pinned under a rock. Candles clung to ledges, stubs weeping wax tears. A table made of pallet wood watched us from a shelf with a ledger, a compass, and a neat array of hooks. The numbers from the slate repeated on the wall in chalk, broken by a handprint smudged sideways. Who lives between tide and breath and calls it home? Our lantern licked a tarp. Beneath it, a dry bat. Inside, a radio the size of a book blinked a soft green, listening to something we could not hear. The radio's lead pulsed in time with the beep we had chased from the cottage. 3 soft flashes, a rest. Then 6, quick like a heartbeat, found a sprint. I thumbed the switch and a voice surfaced, half static, half breath, saying only, "Hold and down." The 2 words stepping on each other until they felt like the same command. The ledger was written in tight, neat lines, dates without months, tallies 6 short and 1 long. Then a blank page smudged by a wet thumb. A metal lunchbox held apple slices browning slowly, a stubborn sweetness bright in the warm salt. The candles guttered, a draft worked through the dome in small hands, pinching flames one by one. Above the black, something bumped the cage, polite at first, then harder. The rails complaining. Would you listen to a voice that only knows 2 orders? The radio fell quiet, and from the tunnel we'd come through, a dull light began to grow. Light spilled around the bend in a sheath. Too steady for flame, too soft for day, and the air carried a rubber and ozone tang like rain before it arrives. Our lantern faltered, gave a quick bow, and steadied. A silhouette entered the dome. Not a person at first, but a halo of drops shimmering off a slick hood. Then shoulders. Then the careful shape of someone who knew this place the way lungs know ribs. They lifted a hand, a glove shining with water, and set a small device on the rail with the care of a parent laying down a sleeping child. The cage rocked toward them, willing as a tide. "Hold," the voice said again, but now from the figure's throat, calm and ordinary, and somehow worse. "What do you do when the missing steps in from the dark and asks you to wait?" The device ticked once, the rails locked with a clean, final click that sounded exactly like a door choosing a side. The click hung in the humid air like a rule we hadn't agreed to, and the cage settled against the rail's stop as if relieved to choose a side. The figure's breathing was not hurried, just present, the way a clock is present even when you don't look. They touched the small device and the rails softened their tremor. "Hold," they said again, but the word felt different up close, like a password that unlocks patience. Our lantern made slow halos on the slick stone. The candles, bullied by fresh draft, steadied as if embarrassed. Was this a rescue dressed as a trap, or the other way around? A drop fell from the ceiling and struck the radio, a neat ping that folded into the silence. The metronome of the sea reached us as a hum in the bones. 6 beats, a rest, faithful as ever. The figure pointed toward the pallet table, toward the ledger, then toward the tunnel behind them, where the light narrowed to a throat. They lifted the hood back, just enough for their voice to feel human, and said a name that wasn't ours, then apologized as if misdialing the dark. "You followed the wrong prince," they added, not unkind, and pointed to the chalk tallies 6 days on, 1 day off, a rhythm for storms and tide. The ledger's dates jumped like stones across a stream. Each line ended with a symbol, sometimes a circle, sometimes nothing at all. The radio coughed a thin carrier wave. "Hold or drown," they said, and tapped the device. The clamp released with a sigh, and the cage drifted forward an inch eager. "Down or disappear," they added, and the words braided with the ones Wood heard before until meaning blurred. Who waits at the end of a calendar carved into stone? Who writes a map that only opens from the seaside? Our lanterns swung, slow and tired, and threw our shadows up against the dome like warnings. They moved with the careful grace of someone who had bargained with water and kept most of their promises. From a pouch came a folded oilskin twin to ours, but older, edges chewed by salt. Inside, a circle inland, the same X, a neat arrow that curved backward before pointing forward, like a thought that had to reconsider itself. "It's not a root," they said. "It's a sieve." The word shivered the dome. They showed the bucket clock. 6 drips, pause, 6, then a mark on the rail, a place no cage should pass unless the water breathed in, up top. "The prince end for the ones who can't be followed," they added. Lighter now, almost a kindness. "Would you trust a stranger who saves people by erasing them? Would you believe a door you cannot see from the world you know?" The candles leaned as the tide inhaled. The clamp clicked again, permission granted by physics, and the cage waited like a held breath for someone to choose. We asked where the straight path from the cottage led, the one to the lean-to by the bluff, and the answer came like a stone dropped in a pocket, nowhere anyone should go. They spoke of a winter when the cliff took 3 at once, and the village wrote them down as weather, not names. The sieve began after, a way to draw the desperate to a place that could keep them until the storm chose a kinder face. The ledger's circles were not trophies, but returns. "Some don't want to be found," they said. Simple as a tide table. "Some are being looked for by people who shouldn't win." The radio hissed a note we had not heard. 3 short bursts, a breath, then one long. Different enough to stiffen the air. Who were we to fix a pattern that protected itself by vanishing? The cage creaked as if impatient. Above, the drip faltered. Below, the tunnel light pulsed as though a second lantern was rounding the bend. The new light pushed the mist ahead of it in a pale blade, and the water in the tunnel lifted as if called by name. The stranger's calm finally cracked, not in voice, but in how their hand found the clamp without looking. "Not ours," they said. And the words drained color from the room. Far back, a motor coughed, then smoothed into a murmur that made the rail sing. Our lantern dimmed and rallied. Candles guttered to blue pins. We felt the sea choose its inhale. "Hold," the stranger whispered. Now a plea. And the clamp released. The cage rolled and the dome slipped past us like a lid. The tunnel swallowed sound until only the motor's thin promise remained. We looked back once and saw a second figure step into the chamber's edge, black against the worklight, carrying a hook that flashed once and went dark. The rails pitched downward. The air grew cold again. The water rose to kiss our boots and kept rising. Water licked our boots and kept climbing. A cool, steady hand that didn't care for panic. The clamp hummed, a cricket in nettle skin, nudging us into the dark's throat. The rail sang a thin, anxious note, then settled as if remembering its job. The motor behind us throttled up. The tunnel carried the sound like a rumor. "Brace." The voice beside me said low and steady, and we bent our knees as the grade steepened. The air cooled by degrees, candles a memory away. The sea reclaiming its right to be cold. Would you fight a tide that isn't trying to drown you, only to move you? Our lantern threw tired rings on the rock ribs and found a brass sign pocked with salt hold. Down. We passed it and the water rose to mid-calf, then eased as the tunnel domed. Ahead, a dim coin of daylight flickered. The cage bumped a stop. The line tugged once, like a hand squeezing goodbye. Something clattered behind us. Metal on metal, and the sound didn't echo back. The stop released with a shudder, and the cage slid into a chamber wide enough to breathe in. Air hit like a forgotten promise, dry, resin-sweet, threaded with clean snow. The roof opened to rough timber and daylight poured down a shaft cut by hand and time. A ladder waited. New rope, fresh knots, the kind of kindness that knows where it is needed. We stepped from the cage onto a ribbed stone lip, slick with old wax, and found a bell bolted to the wall. Its clapper tied back with blue thread. "Ring and you call." "The wrong ears," the voice warned. The motor's hum swelled again from below, followed by the neat, ugly scrape of a hook on rail. The radio on the pallet burped 3 shorts, and 1 long, an answer to a question we didn't want. Would you climb into light if it meant leaving someone in the dark on purpose? We moved for the latter. The cage twitched, wanting to follow, and then chose to stay. We climbed into a throat of light that tasted of pine and frost, shoulders brushing timbers rubbed smooth by hands we would never meet. Each rung barked softly, and then forgave the weight. Halfway up, the shaft narrowed, and the old world went quiet beneath us. The motor's growl muffled to a cat's purr. A square swung above, a hatch cut from weathered planks, and wind pressed its cheek against the seat. "Slow," came the whisper from below, but not to us, to the place itself, as if the ladder might spook. My fingers met iron cold enough to ache. The hatch lifted on a sigh of cedar smoke and snow glare. We pulled through into a boathouse, loft breathing winter, rafters stitched with old nets, a narrow window riding light on dust. Outside, a shoreline blinked white and blue. The radio's green eye glowed at my hip, patient. The rope below gave a courtesy tug, then another, impolite. The loft door watched the yard through warped glass where the day had arranged itself, as if expecting guests, 2 paths stamped in clean snow. A skiff belly up, a lean to sagging at the bluff. The metronome in my pocket ticked its private 6, rested and ticked again, calm as a teacher in a storm. From the trap below, metal whispered metal, the hook finding the clamp, and a second breath joined ours in the shaft, slow, deliberate, and wrong. We crossed the loft, floorboards speaking in low vowels. The stranger pulled a tarp and revealed a coil of line already tied into a bowline that matched the tally carved on the shaft. 6 short, 1 long, out and gone, they said, meaning now. The door latch stuck. The glass hummed as the motor reached the chamber beneath. Would you leave a door open for the thing that follows? We kicked the latch. The world went white and cold and wider than our choices. We hit the yard and the cold, took our breath and honed it. The sea wore a hard silver. The cliff an old frown. The sky a sheet you could tear with a nail. The 2 paths waited like sentences with different endings. We chose the curve toward the firs, away from the bluff's mouth, feet drumming a new story into the fresh snow. Behind us the loft window flashed. 1 blink, and a shape shouldered through the hatch shadow, featureless and intent, a hook shining once before the light swallowed it. The radio at my hip whispered a soft carrier, then a word that could have been down or done. We ran. Needles shook off sugar. The wind braided our breath into ropes we had to pull. The path swung toward the cottage door we'd first opened, and there on the mat, 3 cups steamed in the cold, as if time had set a table and expected company. A bell rang once, then didn't. The snow began to speak.